Sarah Mitchell had always been the type of person who blended into crowds. At 32, she worked as a librarian in the small town of Cedar Falls, spending her days organizing books and helping students with research. Her colleagues knew her as someone who spoke softly, smiled politely, and never caused any trouble. What they didn't know was that Sarah carried a secret that would have shocked them all. Growing up on her grandfather's ranch in Montana, Sarah had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her grandfather, a World War II veteran named Jack, had taught her everything about firearms, from basic safety to advanced marksmanship. Those summer days on the ranch felt like a lifetime ago now, but the skills remained buried deep within her muscle memory. The shooting range incident happened on a Saturday afternoon in late September. Sarah had been having a particularly difficult week at work. Budget cuts threatened her job, and she felt the familiar weight of stress pressing down on her shoulders. She remembered her grandfather's advice about finding peace through focus and decided to visit the local shooting range for the first time in years. The Cedar Falls Shooting Complex was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Groups of friends competed in friendly matches, families taught their teenagers gun safety, and serious marksmen practiced for upcoming competitions. Sarah felt out of place in her simple jeans and cardigan, carrying an old rifle case that had belonged to her grandfather. She paid for lane time and quietly set up at the far end of the range, hoping to avoid attention. The rifle felt familiar in her hands despite the years that had passed. It was a Remington 700, carefully maintained and modified by her grandfather over the decades. As she loaded the first magazine, memories of those Montana mornings flooded back. The crisp mountain air, the satisfaction of hitting targets at incredible distances, and the quiet pride in her grandfather's eyes. The 100-meter target seemed almost insultingly close after the vast distances she had conquered as a teenager. Her first few shots hit the bullseye with mechanical precision, each bullet finding its mark exactly where she intended. Other shooters began to notice the consistent accuracy coming from the quiet woman at the end of the range. Word spread quickly among the regular patrons. Tom Bradley, a former Marine and the range's unofficial expert, wandered over to see what was happening. He watched in amazement as Sarah continued to place shot after shot in the center ring, with seemingly effortless precision. Her breathing was controlled, her stance perfect, and her trigger control flawless. "Ma'am," Tom said during a ceasefire, "I've been shooting for 20 years, and I've never seen accuracy like that. Where did you learn to shoot?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the attention. "My grandfather taught me when I was young," she replied simply, not elaborating on the countless hours of training or the natural talent that had emerged under Jack's patient guidance. Tom nodded respectfully. "Would you be interested in trying something more challenging? We've got targets set up at longer distances." Other shooters had gathered around, curious about the quiet woman who shot like a professional. Sarah felt uncomfortable with the attention, but found herself nodding. The competitive spirit that had driven her as a teenager was awakening after years of dormancy. They moved to the longer range where targets were positioned at 300 meters. The wind was picking up, adding complexity to the shots. Sarah took her time, reading the conditions the way her grandfather had taught her. She adjusted her scope slightly and settled into position. The shot rang out and the spotter called back that she had hit dead center. The small crowd of observers murmured appreciatively. Sarah felt a familiar surge of satisfaction, the same feeling she had experienced during those long-ago summers when she could place shots exactly where she wanted them, despite wind, distance, and other challenging conditions. "How about 500 meters?" someone called out. Sarah looked down the range at the distant target, barely visible to the naked eye. She had regularly hit targets at this distance and beyond during her youth, but that was years ago. Still, something inside her responded to the challenge. Her grandfather had always said that true. Marksmanship was about more than just technique. It was about understanding yourself and trusting your abilities. She made the necessary adjustments to her scope and settled into the shooting position that felt as natural as breathing. The world around her faded away as she focused entirely on the distant target. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and she became one with the rifle in the same way she had learned decades earlier. The bullet flew true, striking the center of the 500-meter target with precision that left the gathered crowd speechless. Tom Bradley shook his head in disbelief. "Lady, you need to be competing professionally. That's military sniper-level accuracy. Sarah smiled quietly and began packing up her equipment. She had proven to herself that the skills were still there, preserved despite years of disuse. The stress of the work week had melted away, replaced by the calm confidence that came from doing something she truly excelled at. As she prepared to leave, Tom approached her again. "There's a long-range competition next month. The prize money is substantial, and there are scouts from various organizations who attend. You should seriously consider entering." Sarah thanked him politely but made no commitments. In her mind, this had been a personal test, a way to reconnect with her past and honor her grandfather's memory. She had no intention of drawing more attention to herself or her unusual talents, but as she drove home that evening, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive and confident. The quiet librarian facade was still there, but underneath, the marksman her grandfather had trained was stirring to life once again. The other shooters at the range would spend the rest of the evening talking about the mysterious woman who could shoot like a trained sniper. None of them realized they had just witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary, the awakening of a talent that would soon capture national attention and change Sarah's life forever. The news about Sarah's shooting ability spread through Cedar Falls faster than she could have imagined. By Monday morning, 3 different people at the library had asked her about the weekend at the shooting range. Sarah tried to downplay the attention, but Tom Bradley had been telling everyone who would listen about the librarian who shot like a trained military sniper. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, pulled her aside during lunch break. "Sarah, I heard some interesting things about your weekend activities. I had no idea you were into competitive shooting." Sarah felt her cheeks redden. "It's just a hobby from when I was younger. Nothing serious." But Mrs. Henderson looked intrigued rather than concerned. "Well, it sounds like you're quite talented. The town could use some positive publicity, especially with all the budget discussions happening. Have you considered that competition Tom Bradley mentioned?" The idea of entering a formal competition made Sarah nervous. She had spent years cultivating her quiet, unremarkable image. Drawing attention felt dangerous, though she couldn't quite explain why. Perhaps it was because her grandfather had always warned her that exceptional abilities could bring unwanted scrutiny. That evening, Sarah called her mother in Arizona. Margaret Mitchell had always worried about her daughter's tendency to hide her talents. After Sarah's father died when she was 16, she had become even more withdrawn, focusing solely on academics and safe career choices. "Mom, do you remember how good I used to be at shooting?" Sarah asked. Margaret laughed. "Remember? Honey, your grandfather bragged about you to anyone who would listen. He said you had a natural gift that he'd never seen before, not even in the military. Why do you ask?" Sarah explained the events at the shooting range. Her mother listened quietly, then spoke with unusual firmness. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, your grandfather would roll over in his grave if he knew you were hiding that talent. He spent years teaching you because he saw something special. Maybe it's time you stopped being afraid of being exceptional." The conversation haunted Sarah for days. She found herself thinking about her grandfather more often, remembering not just the shooting lessons but his stories about courage and standing up when it mattered. Jack had been a decorated sniper in the Pacific Theater, though he rarely spoke about the war itself. Friday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the library. A tall woman in military dress uniform approached Sarah's desk. She introduced herself as Major Lisa Rodriguez from the Army Marksmanship Unit at Fort Benning. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you demonstrated some impressive shooting skills recently. I'm in town recruiting for our civilian marksmanship program and your name came up." Sarah felt her heart racing. "I think there's been some misunderstanding." "I'm just a librarian," Major Rodriguez smiled. "The best marksmen often come from unexpected backgrounds. We're looking for naturally gifted shooters to represent the country in international competitions. Would you be willing to demonstrate your abilities under more formal conditions?" The conversation continued for 20 minutes. Major Rodriguez explained the civilian marksmanship program, the training opportunities, and the potential for representing the United States in international competitions. The more she talked, the more surreal the situation became for Sarah. "There's a qualification shoot this weekend at the state training facility," Major Rodriguez concluded. "The distance will be up to 1,000 meters and we'll be testing various conditions. If you're interested, I can arrange for you to participate." Sarah asked for time to think about it. That weekend's shooting session had been meant as a private moment of reconnection with her past. Now it seemed to be opening doors she had never expected to see. Saturday morning found Sarah at the state facility, 3 hours from Cedar Falls. The setup was far more professional than the local range, with multiple shooting positions and targets at distances she hadn't attempted since her teenage years. Other competitors included former military personnel, police officers, and serious civilian marksmen. The qualifying stages started at 600 meters and progressed to increasingly difficult distances and conditions. Sarah found herself falling into the familiar rhythm her grandfather had taught her. Each shot became an exercise in patience, calculation, and trust in her training. At 800 meters, half the competitors had been eliminated. Sarah remained, shooting with the same calm precision that had amazed the crowd at Cedar Falls. Major Rodriguez watched through binoculars, making notes and occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. The 1,000-meter targets were barely visible even through the scopes. Wind conditions were challenging, and the afternoon sun created heat mirages that distorted the view. Sarah took extra time studying the conditions, remembering her grandfather's lessons about reading wind and compensating for environmental factors. Her first shot at 1,000 meters hit just outside the center ring. The second shot found the bullseye. By her fifth shot, she had achieved a grouping that impressed even the most experienced competitors present. Major Rodriguez approached her during the break. "Ms. Mitchell, in 15 years of recruiting, I've rarely seen natural ability like yours. Your technique is solid, but more importantly, you have the mental composure that can't be taught. How would you feel about advanced training?" Sarah looked around at the other shooters, people who had dedicated their lives to marksmanship. "I'm not sure I belong here. These people are professionals." "So could you be," Major Rodriguez replied. "The question is whether you're willing to explore that possibility." The drive home gave Sarah time to process what had happened. She had not only qualified for the advanced program, but had outshot competitors with decades more experience. The quiet librarian identity she had maintained for so long was beginning to feel like a costume she had outgrown. Sunday evening, she sat in her apartment looking at her grandfather's old photos from the war. In one picture, he stood with his rifle beside a sign indicating a record shot at extreme distance. On the back he had written, "For Sarah, may you always have the courage to use your gifts." She realized that her grandfather hadn't just taught her to shoot. He had taught her to be precise, patient, and confident in her abilities. Those lessons applied to more than just marksmanship, but somehow she had forgotten them in the years since his death. Monday morning, Sarah called Major Rodriguez and accepted the invitation to advanced training. Mrs. Henderson granted her a leave of absence, expressing pride that someone from their small library was being considered for national-level competition. As word spread through town, Sarah found herself becoming a local celebrity. The quiet woman who had checked out books and answered research questions was transforming into someone who might represent her country on the world stage. The change felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like waking up from a long dream to discover who she really was. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, surrounded by the most elite marksmen in the country. The facility was unlike anything she had ever experienced. State-of-the-art ranges, cutting-edge equipment, and coaches who had trained Olympic champions and military legends. Her roommate was Kelly Chen, a former Marine who had been competing internationally for 5 years. Kelly was friendly, but initially skeptical about the librarian from a small town who had supposedly qualified on her first attempt. "No offense," Kelly said on their first night, "but most people train for years before they even get invited here. What's your background?" Sarah explained about her grandfather and the summers in Montana. Kelly listened with growing interest, especially when Sarah mentioned Jack's wartime service and his reputation as an exceptional marksman. "Your grandfather was Jack Mitchell?" Kelly's attitude changed immediately. "I've heard stories about him. Some of the older instructors here still talk about techniques he developed. If he trained you personally, that explains a lot." The first week of training was brutal. The program was designed to push even experienced competitors to their limits. Sarah struggled with some of the physical conditioning requirements, but her shooting skills remained remarkably consistent. Other trainees began to notice that she rarely missed, regardless of the conditions or pressure. Coach Williams, a gruff former Army sergeant, paid special attention to Sarah's performance. During individual sessions, he pushed her to attempt increasingly difficult shots. What impressed him most wasn't just her accuracy, but her ability to remain calm under pressure. "Mitchell," he said after she successfully hit targets at 200 meters in strong crosswinds, "you have something that can't be taught. Most shooters need years to develop the mental game you seem to have naturally." Sarah felt both proud and nervous about the attention. She was beginning to understand that her abilities were truly exceptional, but the responsibility that came with that recognition was overwhelming. Other trainees looked to her for guidance, coaches analyzed her technique, and program administrators discussed her potential for international competition. The breakthrough moment came during her third week at the facility. The advanced trainees were participating in a long-range challenge designed to simulate extreme competitive conditions. Targets were positioned at distances up to 1,800 meters, with complex wind patterns and time pressure adding to the difficulty. Sarah found herself in the final group of 5 competitors. The others were seasoned professionals with extensive competition experience. As they approached the longest distance targets, tension in the observation area was palpable. Even the coaches stopped their other activities to watch. The 1,800-meter target was barely visible even through high-powered scopes. Wind conditions were particularly challenging, with gusts coming from multiple directions. The first 3 shooters managed respectable groups, but none achieved the precision needed for international-level competition. When Sarah's turn came, she took extra time studying the conditions. She remembered her grandfather's advice about trusting instincts when technical analysis reached its limits. The wind patterns were complex, but she could feel the subtle changes in direction and intensity. Her first shot hit the outer ring of the target. Good, but not exceptional. She made slight adjustments and fired again. This shot found the inner ring. The third shot hit dead center, drawing quiet murmurs from the observers. Coach Williams called for wind readings and environmental data. According to the instruments, conditions were the most challenging they had recorded all week. Yet Sarah's 4th and 5th shots both found the center ring, creating a grouping that would have been impressive at half the distance. "Mitchell, that's the best performance we've seen at that distance this year," Coach Williams announced. "You've just shot better than some of our Olympic team members." The revelation stunned everyone present, including Sarah herself. She had known she was accurate, but shooting better than Olympic-level competitors seemed impossible for someone with so little formal training. That evening, program administrators held an emergency meeting to discuss Sarah's performance. Major Rodriguez called with news that would change everything. "Sarah, based on your training results, you're being fast-tracked for the national team selection process. There's an international competition in 6 months, and we want you to be ready for it." The conversation continued for an hour, covering training schedules, competition requirements, and the level of commitment required for international competition. Sarah learned that she would need to take an extended leave from her job and essentially dedicate her life to marksmanship for the foreseeable future. "I need time to think about this," Sarah said finally. "Of course. But Sarah, you should know that talent like yours appears maybe once in a generation. The shooting community is already talking about you, and you've only been here 3 weeks. That night, Sarah called her mother to discuss the opportunity. Margaret Mitchell listened carefully, then shared something she had never mentioned before. "Honey, your grandfather once told me that you reminded him of the best natural marksman he had ever seen. A soldier in his unit who could make impossible shots look easy. He said that kind of ability came with responsibility." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked. "He believed that when someone has exceptional talents, they have an obligation to use them for something meaningful. He saw your gift as something that could represent the best of American precision and dedication." The conversation helped clarify Sarah's thinking. She realized that her reluctance to embrace her abilities had been holding her back from fulfilling her potential. Her grandfather had spent years developing her skills not just for personal satisfaction, but because he recognized something special that deserved to be shared with the world. The next morning, Sarah informed the program administrators that she was committed to pursuing international competition. The decision felt both terrifying and liberating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering she could fly. Her training intensity increased immediately. Additional coaches were assigned to work with her on mental preparation, competition strategy, and media training. For the first time in her life, Sarah was the center of attention not because she was trying to blend in, but because her exceptional abilities demanded recognition. As news of her rapid progress spread through the shooting community, Sarah began receiving interview requests and sponsorship offers. The quiet librarian from Cedar Falls was becoming a rising star in American marksmanship, and everyone wanted to know her story. The transformation was remarkable, but Sarah never forgot her grandfather's lessons about humility and continuous improvement. No matter how much praise she received, she remained focused on perfecting her craft and honoring the legacy of the man who had believed in her potential before she even understood it herself. 6 months of intensive training had transformed Sarah into a completely different person. Her days began at 5 a.m. with physical conditioning, followed by hours of technical shooting practice, mental preparation sessions, and equipment maintenance. The quiet librarian who had once hidden in the stacks was now preparing to represent her country on the world stage. The International Long Range Championship was being held in Scotland, featuring the best marksmen from 32 countries. Sarah had qualified for the team by posting the highest scores in American trials, beating competitors with decades more experience. The shooting community was buzzing with excitement about the newcomer who had appeared from nowhere and dominated every competition she entered. Media attention intensified as the team prepared for international competition. Sports Illustrated wanted to feature Sarah on their cover. ESPN requested exclusive interviews, the story of the small-town librarian who had become a world-class marksman captured public imagination in ways that surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. "I still feel like I'm pretending to be someone else," Sarah confided to Kelly Chen during their final training session in Colorado. Kelly had become both teammate and close friend, helping Sarah navigate the pressures of sudden fame. "The shooting doesn't lie," Kelly replied. "You're consistently hitting targets that most people can't even see clearly. This isn't pretending, this is who you really are." The team arrived in Scotland 2 weeks before the competition to acclimate to local conditions. The venue was a remote facility in the Highlands where wind patterns and weather changes could shift dramatically within minutes. These conditions would test every aspect of their training and preparation. Captain Morrison, the Scottish team leader, greeted the American team with professional courtesy tinged with curiosity. He had heard about Sarah's rapid rise and wanted to assess the competition himself. "Ms. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you," he said during the welcome reception. "Our team is quite interested to see how American training methods have produced such remarkable results in such a short time." Sarah handled the attention with growing confidence. Months of media training had taught her to be gracious without revealing strategic information. She understood that her sudden emergence had made her a target for psychological pressure from competitors who hoped to rattle the newcomer. The first week of practice revealed the true challenge ahead. The Scottish weather was unpredictable, with rain, fog, and sudden wind changes that made consistent shooting nearly impossible. Sarah struggled initially, her scores dropping as she adapted to conditions unlike anything she had experienced in training. Coach Williams worked with her extensively on reading the unique environmental factors. "Every venue has its personality," he explained. "This place is testing your ability to adapt, not just your fundamental skills." Gradually, Sarah began to understand the rhythm of the Scottish weather. She learned to read the subtle signs that preceded wind changes, to compensate for the moisture in the air, and to time her shots during brief moments of stability. Her scores improved steadily as she absorbed lessons that usually took years to master. The other team members watched her adaptation with professional respect. David Park, a veteran competitor making his 4th international appearance, offered advice and encouragement as Sarah worked through the challenges. "Your first international competition is always overwhelming," he said. "The key is remembering that the fundamentals don't change. Everything else is just environmental variables to be calculated and compensated for." 3 days before competition began, Sarah achieved a breakthrough that surprised even her coaches. During a practice session in particularly difficult conditions, she successfully hit targets at 2,000 meters, a distance that few marksmen in the world could manage consistently. The achievement was witnessed by competitors from multiple countries, instantly establishing her as a serious contender for the championship. News of the practice round performance spread quickly through the international shooting community. Suddenly, Sarah found herself receiving attention from competitors, coaches, and media representatives from around the world. The pressure was intensifying, but she felt more prepared to handle it than she had expected. The night before competition, Sarah called her mother from her hotel room in Edinburgh. Margaret Mitchell could hear the nervous energy in her daughter's voice, but also detected a confidence that had been missing for years. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Margaret asked. "Scared and excited at the same time," Sarah admitted, "but also grateful. I keep thinking about Grandpa and how proud he would be to see me here." "He is proud," Margaret said firmly. "I know that wherever he is, Jack Mitchell is beaming with pride about his granddaughter representing America in international competition." The conversation helped calm Sarah's nerves. She spent the evening reviewing her equipment one final time, checking scope adjustments and practicing her pre-shot routine. Everything had to be perfect for the most important competition of her life. Competition day dawned with typical Scottish weather, overcast skies with intermittent drizzle and variable winds. Conditions that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier now felt manageable to Sarah. Her training had prepared her for exactly these challenges. The opening ceremony was formal and impressive, with competitors from around the world presented to an international audience. When Sarah's name was announced, she felt a surge of pride representing her country. The quiet woman who had spent years avoiding attention was now stepping forward to compete at the highest level of her sport. As she took her position for the first stage of competition, Sarah felt her grandfather's presence with her. All the lessons, all the patient instruction, all the encouragement to pursue excellence had led to this moment. She was no longer hiding her abilities or questioning whether she belonged among the world's best marksmen. The first target was positioned at 1,000 meters, a distance that had once seemed impossibly far but now felt almost routine. Sarah settled into her shooting position, read the wind conditions, and prepared to demonstrate to the world what a quiet woman from Cedar Falls could accomplish when she finally embraced her extraordinary talents. The transformation was complete. The librarian had become a warrior, ready to compete with precision, confidence, and honor on the world's most demanding stage. The first day of competition established Sarah as a serious contender. Through 3 stages of increasingly difficult shooting, she maintained scores that kept her in the top 5 among 64 competitors from around the world. Her consistency under pressure impressed veteran marksmen, who had expected the newcomer to struggle with championship nerves. By the second day, media attention focused heavily on Sarah's performance. International shooting had never generated significant mainstream interest, but the story of an American librarian competing against military snipers and professional marksmen captured global imagination. News outlets from multiple countries requested interviews and background features. "The pressure is getting intense," Sarah mentioned to Kelly during a break between stages. "I can feel everyone watching to see if I'll crack." Kelly nodded with understanding. "Use it as fuel instead of letting it drain you. Remember, you've already proven you belong here. Now it's about executing what you've trained for." The third day brought the most challenging conditions yet. Heavy rain and gusting winds made accurate shooting extremely difficult. Sarah watched as several highly ranked competitors struggled with the elements, posting scores well below their usual standards. The adverse conditions were leveling the playing field in unexpected ways. When her turn came for the 1,500-meter stage, Sarah took extra time studying the wind patterns. The rain made visibility poor, and the target was barely discernible through her scope. She remembered her grandfather's advice about trusting instincts when conditions exceeded technical calculation. Her first shot missed the scoring rings entirely, a rare error that drew concerned looks from her coaches. Sarah remained calm, making mental adjustments based on where the bullet had struck. Her second shot found the outer ring. The third shot moved closer to center. By her 5th and final shot of the stage, Sarah had adapted to the conditions sufficiently to place the bullet in the inner ring. While not her best performance, it was better than most competitors managed in the difficult weather. She maintained her position in the top 5 heading into the final day. That evening brought unexpected news. Competition officials announced that the final stage would include an experimental distance of 2,500 meters, farther than any shot attempted in previous international championships. The addition was controversial. with some competitors arguing that such extreme distances moved beyond practical marksmanship into pure luck. Sarah felt a surge of excitement rather than concern. During her final training sessions in Colorado, she had successfully hit targets at similar distances under controlled conditions. If anyone in the field was prepared for ultra-long-range shooting, it was her. The announcement changed the entire dynamic of the competition. Suddenly, technical shooting ability mattered less than mental composure and the ability to make precise calculations under extreme pressure. Several competitors who had been leading the standings expressed doubts about the new challenge. Captain Morrison of the Scottish team approached Sarah during the competitors' meeting. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you've been practicing at these extended distances. What's your assessment of the challenge?" Sarah considered her response carefully. At that distance, small errors become enormous misses. Success will depend more on reading conditions perfectly than on fundamental shooting skills. Her answer impressed the experienced marksmen present. They recognized that Sarah understood the real nature of extreme distance shooting better than many competitors with far more experience. The final morning dawned clear and cold, with steady winds that would make distance calculation crucial. The experimental 2,500-meter targets were positioned at the extreme end of the range, requiring competitors to use spotting scopes to even locate them properly. Sarah spent an hour studying the terrain between her shooting position and the distant targets. She identified landmarks that would help her judge wind effects at different points along the bullet's path. The preparation was more detailed than anything she had attempted in competition. But the stakes warranted extraordinary effort. When competition began, Sarah watched the early shooters struggle with the unprecedented distance. Most bullets fell short of the target entirely, victims of insufficient elevation adjustment or miscalculated environmental factors. Even experienced competitors seemed overwhelmed by the technical challenges. Her turn approached as the afternoon progressed. Sarah felt calm despite the pressure of competing for her country before an international audience. She had prepared for this moment through months of intensive training and years of foundational instruction from her grandfather. Taking her position, Sarah performed her pre-shot routine with deliberate precision. She checked her scope settings multiple times, confirmed her distance calculations, and studied the wind flags positioned at intervals along the range. Everything had to be perfect for a shot at this extreme distance. The target appeared as a tiny speck through her scope, barely distinguishable from the background terrain. Sarah made final adjustments based on the most recent wind readings and settled into her shooting position. The world around her faded away as she focused entirely on the distant target. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. Her heart rate steadied as she entered the zone of complete concentration that separated exceptional marksmen from merely good ones. In this moment, Sarah Mitchell was exactly where she belonged. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. The bullet's trajectory carried it across the Scottish Highlands toward a target that represented everything she had worked toward since that first day at the Cedar Falls shooting range. 2.5 seconds later, the impact was confirmed by spotters using high-powered telescopes. "Center ring," the range officer announced over the loudspeaker. The silence that followed was broken by applause from competitors, coaches, and spectators who recognized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah had not only hit the experimental distance target, but had placed her shot exactly where she intended, despite conditions that had defeated nearly every other marksman in the field. As news of the shot spread through the shooting community, Sarah realized her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a talented newcomer or an interesting story about potential realized. She had established herself as one of the finest marksmen in the world, capable of achieving accuracy that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. The final hours of competition became a formality after Sarah's extraordinary 2,500-meter shot. While other competitors completed their attempts at the experimental distance, none came close to matching her precision. The bullet that had found the center ring from an unprecedented distance had effectively sealed her victory in the most prestigious international marksmanship competition in the world. Standing on the podium as the Star-Spangled Banner played, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. Less than a year ago, she had been a quiet librarian whose greatest excitement came from helping students find research materials. Now she wore a gold medal representing her country's shooting excellence before an international audience. The media attention that followed was unlike anything she had imagined. Interview requests came from major networks, international sports publications, and documentary filmmakers who wanted to capture her remarkable story. The shy woman who had spent years avoiding notice now found herself at the center of global attention. How does it feel to go from small-town librarian to world champion in less than a year? Asked a reporter from the BBC. Sarah considered the question carefully. The skills were always there, thanks to my grandfather's training. What changed was my willingness to stop hiding from my abilities and embrace what I was capable of achieving. Her response became widely quoted, inspiring people around the world who had been hiding their own talents or avoiding challenges that seemed too ambitious. Sarah's story represented the possibility that extraordinary achievement could emerge from the most ordinary circumstances when someone finally decided to pursue their full potential. The return to America brought new responsibilities and opportunities. Sarah was invited to the White House to meet the president, appeared on major television shows, and received offers to endorse equipment manufacturers and training programs. The quiet life she had known in Cedar Falls seemed like a distant memory. Most importantly, she was offered a position as head instructor at the Olympic Training Center, responsible for developing the next generation of American marksmen. The opportunity to pass on her grandfather's techniques and philosophy to young shooters felt like the perfect way to honor his memory while building her own legacy. Her first group of students included teenagers who reminded her of herself at that age, talented but uncertain about their abilities, needing encouragement to believe in their potential. Sarah found teaching to be as rewarding as competing, perhaps more so because of the lasting impact on young lives. Remember, she told her students during their first lesson, accuracy isn't just about hitting targets. It's about training your mind to remain calm under pressure, to calculate precisely when everything is moving fast, and to trust your preparation when the stakes are highest. These skills will serve you well beyond the shooting range. The Cedar Falls Public Library organized a homecoming celebration when Sarah returned for a visit 6 months after her championship. The entire town turned out to honor their local hero, and Sarah was moved by the genuine pride and affection from people who had known her as the quiet woman behind the reference desk. Mrs. Henderson, her former supervisor, introduced Sarah at the ceremony. We always knew Sarah was special, but I don't think any of us realized just how special until she decided to show the world what she was capable of. During her speech, Sarah acknowledged the people who had supported her journey, especially her grandfather, whose patient instruction had made everything possible. She announced the establishment of a youth marksmanship program in Cedar Falls, funded by her prize money and endorsement earnings, to ensure that other young people would have opportunities to discover and develop their talents. The program became a model for similar initiatives across the country. Sarah visited regularly to work with young shooters, many of whom showed remarkable potential when given proper instruction and encouragement. One afternoon, while coaching at the Cedar Falls program, a young girl named Emma approached Sarah nervously. "Ms. Mitchell, everyone says you used to be really shy and quiet. How did you become brave enough to compete in front of the whole world?" Sarah smiled, remembering her own fears and uncertainties. "I learned that being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the most important courage is the courage to let yourself be seen for who you really are." The conversation reminded Sarah of how much her life had changed, but also how much had remained the same. She was still the same person who found peace in precision and focus, who valued patience and preparation over flashy displays. The difference was that she no longer apologized for her exceptional abilities or tried to make herself smaller to avoid attention. 2 years after her championship victory, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as a documentary filmmaker who had been researching her grandfather's military service. He had discovered records indicating that Jack Mitchell had made one of the longest confirmed shots in World War II history, a feat that had remained classified for decades. "Your grandfather's shot was recorded at 4,000 meters, the filmmaker explained. "It was considered impossible at the time, using equipment far less advanced than what's available today. Military historians now recognize it as one of the most remarkable feats of marksmanship in combat history." The revelation explained so much about her grandfather's teaching methods and his quiet confidence in her abilities. He had achieved something extraordinary himself, and had seen similar potential in his granddaughter. His patient instruction had been preparing her for challenges she couldn't have imagined as a child. Sarah decided to attempt the 4,000-meter distance that her grandfather had achieved in combat conditions. Working with military historians and ballistics experts, she arranged for a commemorative shoot at a specialized facility capable of supporting such extreme distances. The attempt drew international attention from the shooting community. Many experts considered the distance beyond the practical limits of current technology, even with advances in equipment and environmental measurement tools. Sarah approached the challenge as a tribute to her grandfather's memory rather than a publicity stunt. Conditions on the day of the attempt were nearly perfect: clear skies, minimal wind, and excellent visibility. Sarah used a specialized rifle designed for extreme distance shooting, equipped with the most advanced optics available. Still, the technical challenges were enormous. The 4,000-meter target appeared as barely more than a dot even through high-powered scopes. Environmental factors that were negligible at shorter distances became critical variables that could cause misses measured in meters rather than inches. Sarah spent hours studying conditions and making calculations before attempting her first shot. Her initial shots fell short. Victims of incomplete understanding of how atmospheric conditions affected bullet performance at such extreme distances, Sarah made adjustments based on each miss, gradually walking her impacts closer to the target through careful analysis and patient correction. On her 7th attempt, everything came together perfectly. The bullet traveled for nearly 5 seconds before finding its mark, striking the target with precision that amazed everyone present. Sarah had equaled her grandfather's legendary achievement using modern equipment and techniques he could never have imagined. The successful shot was captured on high-speed cameras and shared globally within hours. Sarah Mitchell, the quiet librarian from Cedar Falls, had achieved something that pushed the absolute boundaries of human marksmanship capability. More importantly, she had honored the legacy of the man who had believed in her potential before she understood it herself. Standing at the firing line after the successful shot, Sarah felt her grandfather's presence more strongly than ever. She had fulfilled the promise he had seen in a young girl learning to shoot on a Montana ranch, transforming natural talent into world-class ability through dedication, patience, and the courage to embrace her extraordinary gifts. The journey from hiding in library stacks to standing among the world's finest marksmen had taught Sarah that exceptional abilities carry the responsibility to inspire others and push the boundaries of what's considered possible. She had found her true calling not just in competition, but in demonstrating that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they stop limiting themselves and start believing in their potential. As she packed up her equipment that day, Sarah thought about all the young shooters in her programs who might be capable of their own remarkable achievements. Her story had shown that greatness often begins with a quiet voice asking, "Any snipers here?" and the courage to step forward when opportunity calls.